All right, guys. So I wanted to go back to touching on some of the tech concepts and things we were talking about before. I want to start incorporating more business related content, but I want to make sure I don't lose track of the tech stuff either. So I want to go back to networking. And if you remember the first series I did, which was the Naruto networking series, I used that three-part series to just briefly touch on some of the basic, super surface level ideas of networking and the concepts behind it, as well as the concept of networking itself. So we're going to kind of pick that back up, but it's not going to be a direct addition to the Naruto and networking series. I'm going to use Yu-Gi-Oh in this video to paint a picture of another part of networking, which is called subnetting. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So just a quick rehash of networking and all that stuff, primarily when it comes to IP addresses. Networking is the concept of different computer systems, phones, tablets, and the like being directly and indirectly, but directly connected to one another for the purpose of sharing data and information back and forth. Plain and simple. The thing is, just like with people, your network is a collection of those devices. The way with people, your network is a collection of people that you're directly connected to and even indirectly connected to, pretty much for the same purpose of exchanging information. But you need to be able to identify those people in your network the same way you need to be able to identify those computers and things in your Wi-Fi, your personal network. There are a couple ways to do this. They're called addresses, IP addresses, and MAC addresses. But we're going to give a quick rehash to IP addresses. Think of it like this. The IP address is kind of like a ID in a version. Think of it kind of like a school ID or something like that, where one, it proves that you're part of this group. So if you have an ID, for example, if you go to, say whatever college that you go to, you're usually going to have a school ID. If you go on another college campus, and maybe you're cutting up, you're acting a fool, or maybe a security guard just presses you for whatever reason just to safety check, and you'd be like, hey, are you a student here? Are you part of this group? Do you belong here? You can pull out the student ID and say, I'm a college student, and be like, you're a college student, but you're not a college student here. Are you visiting somebody? And that's when you usually go into more of that rabbit hole. So that's one function of IP addresses. One is meant to give an idea of what group you're a part of. Two, the main reason, when you're talking about people from different networks, from different groups, trying to connect with one another, that's where the IP address comes into play. When you're talking about MAC addresses, you're talking about just in your own personal household, and for whatever reason, maybe you and a sibling are sending messages, or a best friend or somebody else in the same house, the same apartment, just the same area, connected to the same Wi-Fi, and you're exchanging information. You just use the MAC address to do that. The IP address is specifically meant to hop from one place to another place to another place to another place, right? So that's why I say the IP address, think of it kind of like a school ID, because you may have a school ID for the college you go to. You may have a homeboy or homegirl that goes to a different college that's not far, but their school ID is going to look a little different. And they may have another friend that goes to another college. Their college ID or school ID is going to look a little different. And through that process, it helps to, of course, identify you. That's why you have the card. So that's where you have the two functions of IP addresses. One, it lets you know what group you're a part of. Two, more simply, it's meant to identify you. Now we're going to dive into this a bit more. And this is where we're going to introduce the concept of subnetting. So you have an individual network. You can take an individual network and split it up into chunks, the same way you take food or something else and split it into chunks, like the whole pie or pizza analogy, that whole thing. When you take an individual network and you chop it up into smaller pieces, and you use those smaller pieces for individual different tasks and things, those smaller pieces are called subnets. Smaller pieces of a network, when you segment or you separate certain devices, whether they're computers, servers, databases, whatever the case is, you can use specific subnets for specific reasons. For example, in the work that I do, because I'm on the IT service management / IT operations side of things, some of our customers, our client accounts, the way that some of them have their devices set up, the devices that my employer sells them, the way that they sometimes have it set up is, well, they have some devices that have an Ethernet cord that they directly plug into the device so that it connects to their Wi-Fi network. And from there, they can do whatever they need to do with it. But then they have some devices that are part of a different subnet, meaning they are part of the same overall network, but they have a specific use or a different functionality that separates it from the rest of the devices. Some of those devices, or most of them, like I said, are physically plugged in. They have an Ethernet cord plugged in. Some of their other devices are wireless, so they don't need to plug them into the network. They just use the Wi-Fi the way most people normally do in their homes. But because of this, their IP address or the way they are identified and the subnet or the network, the group that they're a part of, look a little different. And one of the details about this, we won't deep dive into this just yet, but one of the details about this is called subnet masking. And they use this to identify what group is this device a part of, as well as what is its main purpose. And subnet masking, honestly, is a better comparison when it comes to that like school ID example that I gave earlier. To be honest, subnet masking is kind of a better suit for that because subnet masking literally does that. IP addresses, that can happen, but more times than not, people don't do that. Subnet masking, you are making it a point to identify your devices based on their IP address and what it looks like. And from there, you can figure out which device are you looking at and what specific use does it have in our workspace or in my home space. So I'm going to try to use Yu-Gi-Oh to understand this or help paint this picture a little bit easier. So the whole thing with Yu-Gi-Oh, for those who know, the thing with Yu-Gi-Oh is that the U part of the name, it's Yuggioh, for those who don't know. The U part of Yu-Gi-Oh, the name of the anime, the whole thing is that every main character across the series or in the different series throughout the franchise, every main character in their first or last name has that U somewhere in there, the YU. So for the original series, Yu-Gi-Oh! Originally, the main character, his name was Yugi Moto. Yeah, the YU, the Yugi. In the sequel series, the main character name from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, which takes place 10 years later after the original series, the main character's name was Jaden Yuki, or Judai, in his Japanese name, because, anime is Japanese more times than not these days. Well, always has been, but I mean more so that Korea is starting to come up when it comes to manhwas and things like that. That's a whole other thing. But, you know what I mean? Like, the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Show, the main character was Yugi Moto. In Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, the main character's name was Jaden Yuki here in America in English. The sequel series to that, I believe, was 5Ds. The main character's name was Yusei Fudo. You kind of see what I'm getting at? So if someone was to ask, hey, here's my challenge to you. Name me an anime character whose name contains you in their first or last name, and they use synchro summoning to summon dragons. Well, I'm gonna be like, okay. You said the character's name needs to have you somewhere in the name. I'm pretty sure you're talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! By default. You say dragons. Okay. Now I just need to figure out which Yu-Gi-Oh! Like main character or characters uses dragons pretty often, if not exclusively. Okay, that's pretty easy. But then he mentioned a detail about synchro summoning. Oh, that only exists in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. And you're talking about you. That's always the main character of every series, whether it's Arc 5, whether it's Zexal, whether it's the original, whether it's GX. The main character's name always has you somewhere in their name. So you're basically asking me the name of the main character from Yu-Gi-Oh! 5D. So I'm gonna be like, okay, well, that's Yusei Fudo. Easy. You can ask me the same type of question for the original anime. I'm gonna say that's Yugi Moto, but everyone should know that if you're a millennial at least. GX, Jaden Yuki, or Judai Yuki. It's the same. It's easy, but you need a certain amount of detail to do that when it comes to like identifying that. So that goes back to subnetting, primarily when it comes to subnet masking, because subnet masking allows you to get more detail out of the devices you're looking at. If you're trying to identify a device just by the IP address, more times than not, you're not going to know. Most people aren't going to memorize IP addresses for their printers, their computers, their phones, and all that stuff. Most people aren't going to memorize the IP addresses. But if you set up subnet masking and say, hey, I want all of my devices at home to have an IP address that starts off with 1.1.1, and then that fourth number, for those who know what IP addresses look like, it has 4 numbers. The first 3 are used to identify the group. That last number is used to identify the device. That's what subnet masking does. It turns that IP address again into like kind of an ID. This goes back to the ID example. The point of IDs, IP addresses, but IDs, one of the purposes is to let you identify and figure out what group you're a part of. So if you're like, okay, well, I want all of my home devices to have a IP address that starts with 1.1.1, because when I see that, I'm instantly going to think, oh, okay, this is my phone that's at home, or this is my computer that's at home, this is my personal laptop that's at home, this is my TV that's at home. You know, if you're trying to find devices that are at like your workspace somewhere, if you have an office space that you've rented out, then you're going to say, okay, well, I want to make sure there's a clear divide here. So everything at home will start with ones. But let's say your personal workspace, which is like at a separate office or something, it needs to start with two. Everything at the workspace needs to start with 2.2.2. And then from there, that fourth number again identifies the device itself. So let's say I'm here at home and I want all of my devices to start with 1.1.1. And then that fourth number will be 1. And let's just say I'll make that my iPhone, I'll make that my cell phone. Then I'll have another one that says 1.1.1.2. Maybe that's my TV. 1.1.1.3, that's my PlayStation, and so on and so forth. But because of the 1.1.1, I know that all three of those devices have one thing in common. They're all used at home. I don't use them at work, in an office space, whether it's a corporate office space or my own personal office space, maybe that I rent out somewhere. I'll know that just by looking at the IP. Versus if I'm like, okay, well, I'm not worried about my devices at home, but I do want to figure out what's going on with my devices at my workspace. I'm gonna be like, okay, if I had a list, I'm gonna be like, look for anything that says 2.2.2, because that'll instantly let me know that those are devices at my workspace. And I have 2.2.2.1. Maybe that's my personal work computer, like my Mac Mini. Maybe I'll have 2.2.2.2. Maybe that's a printer that I have at the workspace. 2.2.2.3. Maybe that's another computer or work laptop that I have, right? That I leave there. And again, because of the 2.2.2, I instantly know these are my work devices. These are my business devices. I don't use these for personal use. I use these for work versus anything that starts with 1.1.1. That's my personal stuff. I can do whatever I want because that's stuff I use at home. So hopefully that makes sense. I hope that wasn't too much of a runaround, especially incorporating Yu-Gi-Oh into it. Just wanted to illustrate that a bit. But yeah, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and leave the video off here. If that was helpful for you, go ahead and leave me some feedback in the comment section down below. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.